all joining. Good to see a few familiar faces. Bhavik, how's it going? Long time. Felipe. Let's just give everyone another few minutes and then we can get started.
Great. Shreya, would love to know, where are you joining us from? The chat box is all yours. Do let us know where in the world are you joining in from?
I am in Cancun. How many people are going to Snowflake Summit?
How many people are going to the Data AI Summit?
Maybe Maddie can poll some of these questions as we get started. But I think we're probably a bunch of people, and I'm sure we're going to have lots and lots of things to talk about. So let's get started. Very, very excited to do this. This is the first time we're doing this. The idea of Data Dialogues is to bring together some of the smartest minds in the data space to have conversations to see where this sort of very, very quickly ecosystem is headed. So for our first episode, we have two of my favorite people, Max and Julien. I'll let them introduce themselves. Maybe, yeah, Max, Julien, do you want to introduce yourself and we can get started from there? Max,
Okay.
you're on mute. You can't unmute yourself.
All right, I am unmuted. I think we figured it out. Yes, I'll do a super short intro, but my name is Max. I'm a founder at a company called Preset, where we commercialize it. We offer Apache Superset as a service. Apache Superset is an open source BI platform that I started when I was at Airbnb many years ago. I also started Apache Airflow. That's an orchestrator and a data space too. So by some of the people I would assume are familiar with either or both of these projects.
And
awesome,
hi,
Jay, after
hi.
you.
Latency between Cancun and California. Hi, I'm Julien. I'm chief architect at Astronomer. Astronomer is the company contributing to Airflow. Thank you, Max, for creating Airflow. So I started open source a while ago. I got my first committership at the Apache Foundation through the Apache Pig project. So I'm dating myself a little bit. And I went through the motion on Apache Pig, from contributor to committer to PMC member, and being the chair for a year. So that was a nice experience. After that, I started the Apache Parquet project when I was at Twitter, and later on contributing to Apache Arrow and Iceberg and others, and more recently working on Open Lineage, which is an open source project for bringing easy lineage and metadata to the masses. So that's me, and to you, Tarush.
Awesome. My background, been in the data space probably since Max wrote his famous article back in Facebook about the rise of the data engineer. Joined Salesforce as a software engineer and left as a data engineer, built one of the first frameworks around distributing, around being able to extract metrics from logs. Salesforce wasn't able to do this given the architecture and having different companies and different pods. So built one of the first frameworks around that, and just been very, very narrowly focused on data platform. Most recently leading data at WeWork, where worked with Julien on building our first version of data platform. And I think over the last few years, been very, very interested in how does the modern data stack really become a mass adopted product, and what does it mean for us to go from, I don't know, 25,000 data teams in the world today, which is maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% adoption, to really becoming mainstream. So that's really what I've been focused on.
Yeah, I'll do a quick comment on this, but yeah, started a company for me that was a little bit more than 4 years ago, and I come from this background similar to you guys, from big data teams, big data platform teams, where we had like 50 people, 100 people, like 200 people working on data platform. And then what I realized when I started a company in 19, around 2018, 19 is you could get a lot of that infrastructure set up pretty easily, right? So you could get like a world-class a cloud data warehouse. You could install a lot of the tools fairly easily. And since then, that's really like what we've seen in the rise of the modern data stack is just the availability, how fast you can set up some of that, world-class infrastructure.
Yeah. That's definitely a topic we want to dive deeper into. But like maybe I think one of the things on everyone's mind is this is going to be one of the biggest weeks when it comes to data, with Snowflake Summit happening next week. I know Max, you're flying later today. I'm flying there tomorrow. We have Databricks Summit happening around the same time. So would love to kind of get your thoughts on what are some of the things you're most excited about as you think about Snowflake Summit this year, and some of the acquisitions they've made and just what's happening in the space. And so, Julien, would love to get your thoughts because you're not going for Snowflake Summit this year, and you're going to Data and AI Summit. So would love to kind of understand over there, like this trend of like AI, and how does this really, obviously it's a big theme we're seeing this year, but would love to use these topics to go get the conversation started.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if it was time today to decide where to go, maybe I would go to the AI Summit that Julien is going to instead of going to the Snowflake Summit. No, I'm just really interested, I think, to see everything that's happening there. I'm most curious. I mean, like everyone, and kind of obviously everyone is kind of curious about what's happening with LM, AI, and BI, how our vendors integrating some AI functionality into the products that they are building, which is certainly something we have done. We'll be demoing at the Snowflake Summit. So we have a booth. We've got some new functionality around text to SQL, just like allowing for people to it's prototype phase. I think that's what we should expect in this phase. Like a lot of vendors and tool providers and just people, practitioners in this space. I started playing with AI over the past 6 months, and then we have like some really like not so early, but some early prototype of how this is gonna start transforming the space that we're in. So I'm certainly gonna go around, different booths and asking them, what AI features they have now or in the works, and whether they're like vendors have demos for some of these things. So we haven't seen a lot online. I think we've seen like here and there little like data demos and like AI demos like emerging, but I haven't seen like a lot of like brand new, solidified, AI integrations in products quite yet.
I have a feeling this year at Snowflake Summit, everyone is just waiting to like showcase what they've done in AI over the last 6 months. And in some ways, it's like, I think the players who haven't done something over there, it is going to become, I think we're going to start seeing two different camps, right? Who's starting to go an AI first approach, as you mentioned, text to SQL. Would love to sort of dive in a little bit deeper, but I think we're going to see a bunch of things from like a lot of different vendors.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of interesting things on. There's lots of text to SQL going on, right? You can use all the metadata you have about your database, how people are using them, what transformation, how they use them, and in combination with all the existing dashboard and so on, to learn a little bit how you get what information and get to the text to SQL thing, right? You can just ask what metric you want and instantly you have an answer. I think it's very nascent. So there's going to be a lot of how do we validate the results? How do we know that it's giving the right answer? In the end, like LLMs give you the most likely answer based on what everybody is saying. So it's not, we'll see how it evolves. It's very new domain.
I'm very curious, like, obviously being an astronomer, orchestration as a category, with what you're doing around Marquez, with lineage and observability, these are, very, very ingrained into the modern data stack and fit really well into the Snowflake ecosystem. What made you decide this year to actually not go to Snowflake Summit and to actually attend Data and AI Summit?
So I don't know if it's on purpose, but the Snowflake and the Data and AI Summit organized by Databricks are happening almost at the same time. So it makes it really hard to attend both.
Yeah.
Well, on one end, I'm speaking at the Data and AI Summit, so it's just I have to go to that one.
Got it.
And so I think both Databricks and Snowflakes are very interesting. I think on one end, they're both trying to be the entire stack, or like to go end to end, and this is the only thing you need. I don't think people are going to have a single stack. I don't believe in there's going to be a single stack and there's going to be people are going to use many tools for the job, right? It's kind of depending if you're doing machine learning or if you're doing analysis or if you're doing other kind of transformation for compliance or other things. There are different tools you use. And I don't really believe there's going to be consolidation on a single stack and one of those two is going to win, right? So I think they're equally important to follow. They do kind of, I don't know if it's on purpose, but it definitely looks like it, organize their summit at the same time to force people to choose. I didn't go to the Data and AI Summit to spite Snowflake, if that's what not how it works.
Yeah, hopefully we did. We're not, making an allegiance one way or another by showing up at one place or another. But it's interesting. We're talking about the contraction or call it consolidation cycles and explosion cycle. We've been in big explosion cycles, I think, where we've seen a lot of companies emerge and products and open source project. Like it's just been like this garden has been really growing in all sorts of ways and all sorts of direction. We see some sort of like emergence of some consolidation or some patterns. I think that aligns in some ways with some of the economic and the VC back cycles where like everyone got funded 3 years ago. Just about every company, every tool, every open source project out there got funded. I think that creates that creates a diversity and choice for everyone, which is super great, but it also creates confusion, and now you have to like assemble your data platform out of very, very small things that don't necessarily play well together at first. I think what we're starting to see now is the emergence of tools that work better and better together.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, right? And like we went from end-to-end platforms, and that was really the norm many, many years ago. Even think about consumer, where Google Apps could really give you everything. But I think what we're seeing is that people, that one size fits all, and this one platform is going to give you everything, in reality probably fits no one, right? Like people want more flexibility, and I think we over-indexed on the other side, where it's like do we really need 500 vendors and 30 different categories? And I think they kind of both each have their pros and cons, right? And I think we've just gone from like one cycle to the other. I think it's also a space where consolidation seems a little bit tricky. I think, it's really difficult to imagine a world where AWS acquires Snowflake. Does that mean it stops supporting GCP? Does it stop supporting Redshift? It's really hard to imagine Salesforce acquiring Fivetran. Does that mean Fivetran no longer works with Zoho Analytics or HubSpot or Pipedrive and all of these other things? I think we are going to have, just because of the very nature of data and analytics, we are going to have a lot of cross-cloud, a lot of cross-vendors. So we are going to probably have, 4, 5, 6, 7 different players per different category.
I think that's a reasonable place to land, right? If you can have well-identified subcategories, like call it, I don't know, maybe that's somewhere between 5 to 10 subcategories, and for each category to have maybe 3 or 4 emerging solutions that are solid. I think that's enough to choose from, and not so much as super confusing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's why also the data observability category is useful, right? Like there is going to be more than one tool, and probably should not be hundreds of them, right? Like to your point. But it's really important to have a single pane of glass when you see how your data is flowing from your ETL tools to your analytics, to your machine learning, to your BI, to your products, right? If you do a recommendation engine or other things that feed back into your product. and be able to understand dependencies between teams, right? And it's kind of, you will have different teams in your organization that depend on each other, and they use different tools because they use the best tools for the job in their category.
Sure.
And so you need to be able to connect the dots between those things.
I mean, I have a ton of questions there, right? This makes sense in a perfect world, but I'm thinking about the fintech company at Series A with like 100 people and a 3-person data team. And, this is not sort of Max going and leading a team like this. These are probably someone a year or two outside college who might have, used Tableau or Power BI in university, and now are really thinking about what is this modern data stack for this type of company. And,
The thing,
go on.
that company may have a 3-person data team, but every person in the company uses data, right? Like if you're a fintech company, you're kind of, whether you work on billing, you work on abuse prevention, you work on adding features that are like kind of using machine learning to improve the product, everybody's using data. So you have the challenge for that 3-person data company, and then they have 100 people in the company that are their customers. And they also, not just their customers, but also use data. So there's a lot of needing of understanding, right? And they're going to use various vendors to do various things. And so it is a challenge even for those small companies. And so they need tooling, and they need a better connected together data stack, right? Like so that it's not a giant headache to figure out how everything integrates together.
Yeah, I'm gonna take the small company hat too, of like, every team is a data team now is a point, right? So that fintech company with 3 specialists but 100 employees, there's probably half of the people in that company that will work with data every day and interact with some of the data tools, almost every day. Another thing I think I wanted to mention is it has become so, not so easy, but it's so accessible to start using some of these tools too, that even small companies with small data teams can build quite a bit of infrastructure. If I was to pull our architecture kind of data platform diagram at Preset, we're a very small company, right? Like a very small data team. We have built quite a lot. We do have, we have Preset, Astronomer, we have BigQuery, we have multiple databases, we have Fivetran, Segment, right, a transport layer. So it's quite impressive how much complexity you can accumulate. And then to the point of like, then you need metadata management, right? Like even a small company can really use, lineage information and metadata around this.
I think this makes sense, but two of you happen to be two of the smartest people in the data space. So knowing what makes sense for you is very different from, an applied, you're talking about a SaaS company, you're talking about e-commerce, we're talking about fintech, where their core business is not data, right? I'm talking about what happens to these companies. Like at some level, do you, I think Preset's a sort of phenomenal tool. But if we look at like 5 of the tools out there, the big 5, what is that? Looker, Power BI, Preset, Tableau, maybe Mode, Sigma over there. Like, how do I pick between these 5 tools for myself? Like, and obviously all of these, if you go speak to any of these sales teams, they all are going to push you in like a particular direction. It doesn't matter what your use case is, right? All of these tools can support it. So how does a business like that? And I think the broader question, really, I think the hard question I want to ask is, when you look at data teams today, out of 100 data teams today, how many of them are really driving value? Like at the end of the day, are we all just like snake oil salesmen? And like, is this like, what is the ROI of everything we're doing over here really quantified in the last few years?
That's a good one. I don't know if I was like, I hope Julien takes this one first. I mean, on the question of like, what kind of value are data teams delivering? I think it's like now I'm like, is there an analogy here? If the business is a car, what does the data team do? Maybe it's all the electronic circuitry and the, I don't know, the more the part of like
windshield mainly, right? So it's just like in the dark. They turn on the lights and they make it so that you don't go blind and guess where you're trying to go.
But I mean, if you think about like, could we operate without data systems and data specialists, and then there's this idea of democratization. Maybe everyone's a data practitioner in some way now, right? And data is part of every information worker's workflow every day. But I think you need specialists. And for me, like thinking about running my startup, if you switch off the data systems, we're blind. There's we all of a sudden we just don't know what's happening. And that's talking about the observability on the analytics front, but on the observability on the operational front too. There's a lot of vital organs there too.
It used to be that the data was for making decisions, right? Like it's kind of, are people using this feature? Are they using this? And we're going to make decisions of what they need most and something. So that's part of it. But now data is part of the product most of the time, right? Like if you look at Spotify is so popular because of their recommendation engine, which is all data powered. Like if you look at your fintech company that you were giving it as an example, like in fintech, the data is the product, right? Like of course you facilitate transactions, but the data of those transactions is where your product is living, and making sure you detect abuse or you provide other information or who you give credit to and so on.
I think that makes sense, right? Like, especially, we were speaking with the Snowflake guys, and, they're really focused on a whole category of them is sort of data products, and using Snowflake to go power the data to go power the data products category. I think, and that makes sense, right? Because now once you attribute this towards, hey, this piece of infrastructure is actually linked back to product and like being able to power abilities in the product, now that's more quantifiable. Hey, this is really this is like part of core infrastructure and no longer like a nice to have. I think where this kind of leads me to is, there are some core categories inside data, right? Like it doesn't matter what business you are, you need to have a warehouse, you need ingestion, you probably need to have a modeling layer. BI has been one of the core categories because that is your business facing interface of all of the stuff. Now, as we think about data products, we have reverse ETL. Sort of, Julien, the sort of question for you is, where does lineage and observability and sort of governance really, are these really first-class citizens inside, like they seem like really nice to have, but like, who really needs to have this right governance, this right lineage, this right observability? And like, how does, how do you see eventually, all this VC money gone into these different categories? They're probably not tier one right now, right? So how do you see this evolving in the future, and sort of where is this right now?
Sure. How do you dare calling us not tier one? So there's, I would put it in, you need to kind of unpack this a little bit. Like, I've heard a lot of time people saying, I need lineage. And you're like, why do you need lineage for? Because there's like 5 different reasons people need lineage, and they imply very different ways to get it or to analyze it. So on one way I look at it often is looking at the data experience, right? Like on one, there's a developer experience, like how you make new transformations, whether you're an analyst, like you were saying, like modeling, so it's either ingesting data. You create transformation from either ingesting data or like preparing data to make it better modeling for analysts, or doing a transformation for analysis, or doing machine learning. So they're all transformation of data, right? They take data in, they spit data out. So there's the experience of creating that. So it's kind of more the developer experience. And then once you push them in production, there's making sure it keeps running all the time, knowing that you're creating this graph of transformation around your data, and you have like this dashboard here in preset, for example, is derived from a lot of transformation along the way. It's coming from an ETL, maybe it's using Fivetran, maybe you use DBT or Airflow in the middle. There's a lot of things happening in there, right? And so this operation aspect, knowing that everybody's changing stuff everywhere, right? The product is changing, how you instrument the product is changing, the schemas are changing, people are changing how they understand the business. Everything is changing all the time. So the first aspect of data observability is building in reliability, right? I've created this data set that a lot of things depend on. how do I know that over time it's going to keep running, right? And how do we prevent breaking all of that, knowing that all those pieces are changing all the time? So that's the data reliability aspect. Does my data show up? Does it show up in time? Is it correct? Like the whole data quality aspect. So detecting it and understanding through lineage the root cause of the problem. So that's one big aspect. And now that data is also mostly the product as well, right? You feedback in your recommendation engine or other aspect. It's really production, really important. People want to be paged when it's not working, right? Like, do my user notification not go out? I want to know about this. And other aspect, there's all the governance, compliance, all the compliance aspects. So in the banks, all have compliance requirements when they need to provide column level lineage to show that, oh, when we provide numbers to the government since the subprime crisis and so on, or Enron and what happened before, it's just when I show reporting to the government about, I need to prove that all the data is sound, right? I understand the lineage, the column level lineage, all the way to one import. There's all the privacy laws, like I need to know where my user private data is flowing. So getting all those data, knowing that it's locked down, that it's not going where it's not supposed to be going, all that lineage importance. There's all the governance, discovery. Where is this data coming from? I'm looking at that dashboard. What data are we using to compute that number? How do I verify that the LLM we used to spit the text to SQL dashboard? How do we know that this did the right thing? What data is it using? The right source of data, the one that we vetted that we know is clean, or is it using some random table that's named the same? So there's lots of use cases in just like collaborating, discovery, compliance, reliability, making sure everything's working all the time. And so there's a lot of that. So, and when you're a small team, maybe you understand all your DAGs, you have one Airflow instance, you understand everything. And as soon as you grow, and nowadays, it's not just the data team, it's everybody around it. And the friction comes in between teams, and not understanding how they change something, it breaks whoever is downstream from them.
I'm not even sure if it's a scale problem personally, right? I think the value is clear, should be clear the same way that it is on the application stack. If you think about observability for, you think Datadog, you think tracking metrics, tracking your logs, you think about stack tracing and things like that. It's very established practices. The first thing you do is, you might build an app and build your observability on top, as you productionize it. But most software engineers today will just, pick an observability stack from the get-go and work with it, as part of the software development lifecycle. I think in data, we tend to kind of bolt it on top later on. I don't know why. I think it's just I think data is just less mature than software. If you think data engineering is less mature than software engineering in many ways. So we think of it as a scale problem and something that, okay, when we suffer enough from not having the right observability stack, then we'll put something to kind of patch it and prevent it. So that was one point I wanted to make. I think that's just going to become, or it's not first class citizen, it's just part of the mindset and the architecture, and then just normal reflex and normal practices. The other thing I wanted to say about metadata and lineage is when we think about these AI tools that we're going to be building, or we're building right now, and what they need to be effective, it's kind of the same thing that what analysts and data engineers need to be effective, which is good metadata, good lineage information, good performance reliability metrics, right? So I really think that these, having really good lineage, really good metadata, usage metadata, column level statistics type metadata, performance metadata, all of that, when you give that to an AI or a person, right, any kind of intelligence, whether it's artificial or not, is going to allow for that intelligence to make good decisions and good recommendation and answer questions.
Yeah, the problem is always upstream, right? Whether you have a broken dashboard and the number is wrong, whether you have a machine learning model, and suddenly the accuracy metric go down, and then you look at I look at the training set, I look at how the distribution changed in one of the input columns, the thing. And then I look upstream to figure out why this distribution has changed and it's skewed towards something now. And so the problem is always upstream, and you need to follow the lineage. You need to pull the string and figure out where it's coming from.
Always a bag of nuts. It's always upstream. I think it's always upstream, but yeah, it's always a bag of nuts. You start pulling a thread, it is upstream. And then you're like, okay, what's coming out now? And
then you pull another one, another one.
Put another nut, another bag of nuts, but yeah.
I think it comes down to like everyone wants this. It's just like, do you want to do the work in basically integrating this and maintaining this? And I think something which we're thinking about is, hey, we want to, you go build a platform on 5x and you can kind of pick your warehouse and pick your BI tool and all of this. Can we just give you, think of open lineage just out of the box, right? Everything is done. So you just have this as a base layer. And now things get interesting. It's like, hey, you don't, I think that's one of the advantages of like the end-to-end platforms in the Databricks world, right? It's not, I don't think it's about like, hey, going and integrating Fivetran and DBT and Snowflake and Preset. It's not about joining the tools. That's the easy thing, right? But like, you want to actually go and, build everything out, like the lineage piece of it. Do you want to do governance separately? Do you want to do observability separately? Do you want to do compliance on like 5 different tools? How do you think about cost optimization when you're like 5 different tools, which each sales team over there is trying to like get as much money from you? The end-to-end world, things just work out of the box. And I think that's really kind of the interesting piece of lineage.
Yeah. So that
way they work. Yeah, right. Like I think they might work, but if you look at like the old, say, Microsoft stacks, often like these out of the box are like made out of a collection of acquisition that have, similar problem as you have, assembling your own stack.
I think that's the kind of the mission of open lineage, right? Like the idea is when we started open lineage, I was saying like all the metadata system, like whether it's focusing on governance or data quality and all of that, they were all trying to reverse engineer everything you're using to figure out lineage, right? And the idea was like, well, we're pretty much still in the Stone Age, right? To Max's point, like in the service world, it's all very mature. In the data world, we just cobble a bunch of things together, right? You put a lot of duct tape and as long as it works, it works. As soon as something's broken, it's a big pain to figure out what's going on. So the idea was the only way we're going to solve lineage is if we do it all together as an industry, right? And everybody start like standardizing how we expose lineage, how we represent it. So creation of open lineage is really like, oh, there's open telemetry for services. Let's create something for data lineage. And if there's a lot of concepts that are very similar, the model is different because data is different from services. Services always synchronous calls, mostly coming from upstream across the tree. In data, you do a lot of pulling data from upstream and pushing downstream. So the model is different. So it's a different project than OpenTelemetry.
So we have
concepts.
So we have Gerald here, who is done a lot of thought around lineage, also started Compiler Works, which was doing lineage. But what sort of Gerald asks is, all of this talk around lineage is great, but all of this requires column level lineage. Who actually delivers column level lineage on any platform?
So my opinion on that is it should not be a third party that delivers column lineage for everyone, right? The approach we took in open lineage is the idea is, well, when you use Snowflake, since you were talking about Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift or something, we've been extracting column lineage from the outside, parsing SQL, or in Spark is the same, right? Or in Spark, we collect lineage through inspecting the logical plan and looking at the inside of the operators and so on. So instead of doing it from the outside, again, when the warehouse, your SQL engine already knows exactly what's going on, right? Like to execute the query, it knows exactly what's going on. You can do an explained plan, but it's not designed for machine, right? It's designed for debugging. So really, my opinion is we define a standard on how to expose column lineage, and everybody starts exposing it, right? Whether it's Snowflake, it's BigQuery, it's Redshift, it's Spark SQL, everybody exposes it in a standard way. And that's how we solve the problem, through open source standards. And then you can build all the tools you want on top of it, whether it's compliance, whether it's data reliability, whether it's BI tool, making sure the metric is built on the right columns, on the right tables.
Yeah.
All of those things can be built on top of that.
But are there any tools which do it out of the box today, or is it something which, you would have to go define as sort of metadata, in your lineage layer? I think what Jared was asking is there anyone doing this really, really well, which gives you column lineage out of the box?
Well, and the problem is bigger than, I think if you think about column lineage, you could almost call it like cell level lineage too, because there is like block level lineage too, if you think in terms of like immutable block or Parquet files too. And then there's change management around that too. So there's like logic changes over time. And ideally, we'd want to know and be able to rebuild and then reproduce and recreate, like every single data asset that's been created in the past. And that today, I don't think that any company has, any company, any vendor has a full handle over that, without doing some very complex, like Git archaeology, and then, Slack research, internally to really figure out how things go from point to point. It's surprisingly hard problem to solve.
Yeah, so to that point, I think we're at the beginning of solving it. Like in Open Lineage, we created that, there's a contract and a schema to define how you describe column lineage on a given query, on a given transformation. We have some implementation on the open source side, like on the Spark integration provides column level lineage. We have a SQL parser also that provides information, but that's all a bit from the outside, right?
Yeah.
The idea is we need to keep working with everyone together. Like there's lots of banks, we need that because they have they need to provide the regulators column lineage every 6 months or so. And so there's a lot of driver from the market to get those features. So it's about everybody has to expose that. I think there's an incentive to expose it in a standard way instead of everybody doing a one-off model.
Yeah.
Open Lineage defines one already. We've been collaborating with a few data catalogs as well on how we use this, how we expose that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to make more progress on this aspect.
So it sounds like, we still require external help in being able to build these things. And, you're bullish that over the next, year, 2 years, that we're going to see more of these tools be able to do this out of the box.
Yeah.
So, moving on, because I know we could just spend the next, not just hour, the next few hours talking about lineage, but one of the things which we're starting to see a lot, and sort of Max, you were speaking about something which you guys are doing around text to SQL and, AI, that's obviously on everyone's mind. One of the things which we're starting to see is the semantic layer, and the semantic layer really becoming the entry point into the AI world. And, again, in a very sort of idealistic theoretical world, we now have a pretty well-defined semantic layer. And this means that we could go plug in an LLM on top of this, and these LLMs can now start to answer questions in our business. Hey, what was sales in the last 3 months, and which channels went up and which channels went down? And, actually, in some ways, is this a threat to BI tools? Because a lot of today, what we've needed dashboards, and sort of metrics to do, can now theoretically, BI as the interface, as the UI UX of dashboards and tables, this could be completely replaced with what's happening around, text or text to speech, or sort of a more chat-like interface in AI. So would love to know, what your thoughts are over here, and how does preset/superset look at this?
Yeah, so that's a super big question. I think, with artificial intelligence, we can assume that the way that we interact with not only just data, but like software tools or cars, it's going to profoundly transform the way we interact with the world, right? And I think like one way to think about it now is like we have these like infinite number of very smart assistants now that can come and help us and do things. If you think about BI too, like what is what is a BI tool? You could just say like, oh, it's a window into your data, right? Like it, or, you know, if you really simplify, like what is the goal of a BI tool? It's a general purpose tool to make sense of the data in databases or in your data warehouse. So that's the goal. Now, the interfaces we have today are, you know, explorative type workflows, like where you drag and drop, you know, you imagine now your Tableau, you know, where you take some data, you know, of your data set, you know, your schema, and you're going to come in and do some data exploration, some data publication, right? And then assemble views that you think are representative of the problem at hand, namely a dashboard that kind of summarizes things. Then you have other interfaces that are more like, you know, call it like notebooks and SQL IDEs that are maybe on the edge of BI too, maybe not, you know, thought of as direct, like classic business intelligence, but that part of the stack that people use to answer a question. Now, how is AI going to transform all this? I think like it does make sense. I would have a more conversational approach to data, right? So you can think of the having now an analyst in a box where you can have conversation and say like, show me the data, answer this question. I want to know more about this. So conversational. You'll be able to ask questions that are much more like, what should I even look into? What are the questions I should ask you today? Or what's unusual, right? And those sort of things. So I think that's where we're going. Now, in terms of like, how do we go from where we're at today to this new type of workflow that's completely different? I think there's something, people won't trust the machine at first, right? Because the machine, well, is imperfect, hallucinates, doesn't have the right metadata it needs all the time, and doesn't have the right data some of the time, right? So I think like there's a question of like, how do, from like a UX, UI, or more user experience standpoint, how do we build trust with these AIs over time? And I think you go progressively, right? We don't go from here to chatbot. I think we go from integration and product, maybe text to SQL, maybe like recommendation engines and things like that are still allow you to do your old workflow. But like, I don't think we can go straight there. We have to build trust with these AIs over time.
I'm not even, you know, I don't, to be honest, really care about AI actually going and generating SQL. I think, you know, when you build like a semantic or when you build a modeling layer, that's not just syntax. That is got business context in it. And so I really like the idea of, you know, the abstraction is like, I don't care about my LLMs generating SQL, but I want them to use my semantic layer. You know, this is what our definition of an active user is, or this is what my definition of like daily active users and sales and CTC and all of this. And what they're able to do is join these different metrics in the semantic layer, because, you know, in a very theoretical world too, this is something which is like, it can't be hallucinated, right? If you go execute the query at the weekly, at the aggregate, whatever level at the semantic layer, this information should be correct.
Yeah, I think the semantic layer, you know, semantics are just semantics, and like, you know, SQL and like tables definition are semantics in a lot of ways, right? So I think historically we called, you know, you'd have your physical data model, and then you put a semantic layer on top that adds a little bit more business metadata and some information as to like which tables can be joined to which one, and enriching a little bit the schema with like things that are a little bit more business or human oriented. So I think a lot of these things exist in the SQL layer too. And it's the semantic layer is great information and can help the AI do great work the same way it can help humans do, you know, good work. But do we need that abstraction, or how much we put on a certain layer versus another is also a slippery. So we could spend hours talking about, you know, in terms of like, I do want to put more semantics in your physical data models versus, you know, in the layer on top.
Yeah, validating the output of those models is going to be tricky, right? Because the whole point, right? You're saying, oh, it's much faster for anyone, you know, to go ask a question to the LLM, right, and gives an answer. But the whole point of using that is it goes faster than asking a human. So now if you need to ask an expert to validate the answer and double check everything, it's going to be challenging, because the whole appeal is you take less time from the experts, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to be tricky. And also I think in a lot of cases, those large language models, it looks like they're reasoning, but really they're not. They're not reasoning, right? Like there was this story, there's a professor who submitted his students' papers to ChatGPT and said, "Did you write that?" And ChatGPT happily said yes, like because it's not, you're not asking a question and it's reasoning, right? You're asking a question, it's looking up through its model all the similar questions, right? It's looking up all the similar answers and it's giving the most likely answer. So it's a very powerful information retrieval, but it's not reasoning, right? It's just going, oh, I don't know, but it looks like people are answering this to this question. So it's going to be tricky because I think a lot of tough time people think the model is reasoning, but it's just retrieving, you know, information that is there in a giant, you know, model. So it's going to be tricky. I don't know. I think data observability is going to be very important. So one, to feed the model, and second, to validate that it's doing something that makes sense, right?
I think one of the most interesting use cases out of observability for me this year, obviously everything which you mentioned, but I think something which we're not speaking about, which is really front and foremost, especially on the CFO of every company's mind, is costs. And you know how we at 5X are looking at sort of lineage and observability is, you know, is this able to actually make our data spend more holistic? If we have, what are some of the tables which we're ingesting but not using, and we're paying for all that compute, we're paying all of the ingestion providers? How do we, you know, what's the actual ROI of a dashboard? How much does a dashboard cost? I love that, right? Because you can have the coolest dashboard and preset, hey, this cost me $10,000 a month to actually generate, but 3 people have seen it in the last 2 weeks, and like out of which 2 are interns. Are we really, you know, what's the
and it's not accurate, right? Like it could be like it's that expensive and it's not used very much, and it might be wrong too.
Exactly.
But yeah, what's the ROI of data or data assets, I think is a pretty big challenge, and one that, you know, metadata management and observability can help solving. A lot of the observability work we did at Airbnb and Facebook were around trimming the edges of the metadata graph. So I'll try to explain that better, but there's a lot of objects that just go into disrepair that never get garbage collected. So a lot of the tools and the tooling we were building were there to do that garbage collection at scale, right? And then so I'd be like, which dashboards are completely unused? Then we're going to send an email to the person who created it, or if they left the company, the now manager of that person, and say, you know, we're going to delete this dashboard if you don't click this button in 30 days, right? In the next 30 days, if no one uses the dashboard. And then that enables trimming the underlying, you know, eventually tables, pipelines, you know, but we add automation around garbage collecting these data objects, because it gets nasty, it accumulates very, very quickly.
Yeah, the trick is you need to connect the cost to value, right? Like it's kind of easy to know the cost of each individual nodes in your transformation graph. The value, like you were saying, it's harder, right? Like, so you can look at the dashboard. And also, if you just look at the lineage, who depends on a specific data set, or you can say, oh, it's being consumed by things. But if you keep following downstream the lineage, you'll find out if any of those subsequent transformation actually that is used by anyone. And it reminds me of there's those anticipation novel when they're like, we're in the future when everything is automated, you know, the house, the breakfast cooks itself, everything, right? And we are way past the nuclear war and everybody's dead and the house is still cooking breakfast. You know this story. So your data lake or something, it can be the same. You know, like the people who are using that dashboards have long left, but the automation is still working, right? It's still preparing it every day. So you need to follow the breadcrumbs and figure out who's using it.
That's the use case of observability, or sorry, that's the use case of lineage, which we're most excited about, right? Like, how do we actually, you know, I think this is like a magic number, right? And whether the number is 500 or 1,000, or when your data team is more than 50 people, hey, at that point, you probably need lineage, because I think you said this well, and I didn't highlight it then. I think lineage comes from when you no longer have one person who has all of this in their head. When you have a team behind it, right? Like that's when you need it, because now no one can track it. And that makes sense for a size of company. But the reality of it is there's no magic number because you have the person in your team who knows everything. But the practical applications of this for like earlier stage companies are all around cost optimization, because we have entered a world, I think last year and 6 months ago and 8 months ago, I don't think those times are ever coming back. Unlike, the sort of VC market and everything else, I think we're entering this phase of like do more with less. And when we think about do more with less, I think the rise of FinOps as a sort of category becomes way more important.
Yeah, I don't think you want to get too greedy too, right? So I think there's some beauty and some value in like having an open platform that people can use to create assets openly, right? So I don't think we need to go on the other pivot into the other extreme of like, are you really sure you need to create that data set? Do you realize it's going to be maintained for the next 10 years if you do create it? There's a balance to be struck there. But one thing I wanted to mention related to this is I talk about this, and I think this is going to come up more and more, but this idea of like mountains of SQL, right? With dbt and Airflow and other tools we've built and used over the past 5-10 years, there's so much clutter, right? Like we've made it so easy for people to go and create assets and data set. It was all about like self-service, big data, tools that anyone, we had like, education programs internally at Facebook, Airbnb. So everyone's a data actor. And then what we end up with is a shit ton of SQL that no one can possibly manage ever, right? I think there's dbt produced some analysis on like the average dbt project size, and people just have these DAGs that have 1,000. It's fairly common to have a dbt project with more than 1,000 models in it nowadays, and that's gonna eat us alive, right? At some point, it's like data hoarding, becomes a problem. I'm really hoping that AI can help us make sense of some of that and kind of trim that and clean the house, because a lot of data warehouses just come in disrepair,
So I like this idea of like self-healing, right? And the sort of breakfast example Jay shared. By the way, I call Julien J_, because that is his Twitter. So if I say Jay, I'm referring to Julien. But I love the example Julien shared about the house that cooks itself breakfast long after everyone's dead. I think following, I like the plug, this sort of shameless.
How do we solve this? And now how do we stay into the analogy, the metaphor? And it's like, how does the house needs to monitor?
Yeah, exactly.
Having breakfast or not cook it anymore, right?
Exactly. So I think that analogy goes back into the data world of, hey, if this hasn't been used in 60, 90, whatever days, can we go rid of this, right? Like, what is like the self-healing, data modeling and that's powered by lineage, right? What is the self-healing sort of lineage layer? I think those start becoming really practical applications of like where this is going to go.
Yeah, there's also a trick. Cost attribution is also tricky, right? Because it's a graph, right? So you can start trimming and removing things, but you may have something that's very expensive, but a lot of people depend on it downstream, right? So you get value out of it. So it's kind of tricky. You need to kind of model a bit how you want to decide. There may be a dashboard that uses it, a machine learning model that uses it. Like, how do we decide how we attribute cost and who's going to be willing to pay for that expensive transformation? So it is a tricky problem as well, right? Like understanding the graph and
going from the outside in, right? I think you need to look at so if you look at it like it's a big directed acyclic graph, you have to look at the nodes, the leaf nodes first, so say that's the dashboard. And you're like, okay, no one uses this dashboard, now we can trim that leaf. Now go back and forth. Okay, now there's a data set that's orphaned. The data set was only used by the dashboard that is now, doesn't exist anymore. But it's like, whose job, like here's a challenge at the more personal, like professional level, like who wants to own that problem of like trimming to declutter and clean the house. Yeah. This guy.
So there's another common problem is not just like the thing that's not used anymore, but the duplication, right? Like it's kind of what happens often is like, oh, there's this transformation that exists already. Maybe it's a gnarly SQL query that's 5 pages long, right? And I need to make a change to it for this other use case, right? So what happens is like, well, I'm not going to touch the one that's already load bearing, right? I'm going to duplicate it, do the tweaks I need, create this new table, and that we're going to use for a new project. So there's a lot of that naturally happens because people are afraid to break, also because they don't have lineage, they don't understand exactly who depends on this thing, how it's going to be affected. So they create duplication. And the other thing that's tricky is, and maybe LLMs are going to help with that, but detecting duplication, looking at your graph is like, oh, we do the same join 5 times, right? And it's really expensive. And we could really have a better upstream model that everybody uses instead of everybody reinventing the thing and doing the slightly differently. And for some reason, you always have different, like the customer table like 5 times and with not the same numbers in it, or like the revenue table 5 times with different numbers in it. It's just like, and then you're trying to figure out which one is right and how we understand those things. So that's very tricky.
Because it's not going to be one LLM, they're going to be multiple. You're going to have a cost optimization LLM, which is just like, don't run it. And then the Snowflake LLM, which is like, no, you want to have more up-to-date information, and they're going to be competing with each other. But I know we're almost out of time. I do want to end with sort of one question. We've had a bunch of people in the middle ask us about, what is an ingestion tool I should use and what is a BI tool I should use. And sort of someone recently asked, what is something we can do around data literacy to ensure that we don't lazy use data? And I know this is a little bit of like something generic, but, to that fintech Series A sort of company with 100 people and, a small data team, if they were to get started today, what would, in their first week, what tools would you sort of recommend sort of out of the box, which they should either just go get? And I know Max's answer is going to be preset, but what are some of these tools which should be there as part of the core stack? And what are some of the tools, which they should be evaluating?
Yeah, maybe I'll do an answer and I'll try to stay out of my own category or mention it very quickly. But a stack that we've seen emerge, one on the ingestion front, like Fivetran is very reliable, and you want a cloud data warehouse that's going to scale, so it's like Snowflake, BigQuery. And then I think on the consumption side, we preset, like for people who love and believe in open source, so Apache Superset super great. Preset is just like an easy way to get that managed service around it. But we see still a lot of people using Tableau, Looker. Those are still come up quite a bit. Then reverse ETL, whether that is a second class citizen or a real category, I think for us, that's part of our automation flow. We compute a lot of stuff in the warehouse. We want to send that back to our CRM and other customer facing tool and our product too. So high touch works very well for a lot of people too.
If reverse ETL is second class, is like observability third class, or it's also...
Now I'm going to slam the door and leave this story. So I would like to add something. Seriously, I would like to add something to Max's list. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, all Max said. And then you need some glue to put everything together.
Oh, yeah.
That's where Airflow comes in. You need orchestration, And
this is not us just pitching our own company.
Yeah, I would say DBT, but like DBT and Airflow, I think are like, you need to trigger and orchestrate all this stuff. So
yeah.
I
would love to continue this, because what I'm very, very curious to know is, in the for a data team 0 to 2 years old, what percentage of workloads actually need a non-SQL interface? And like, when does, again, just like we asked, when does observability become relevant? When does, I look at orchestration in some ways orchestration in some ways has now become the entry point into like data science, right? Like, hey, when you actually need your first data science use cases, that's when you need it. But in the core data and analytics layer, is it really, what percentage of workflows are non-SQL based?
But I think SQL has been used a lot in analytics, right? Like feeding into the dashboard and so on. But as soon as you do machine learning and you do a bit of recommendation engine or things like that, then you'll use different tools. Like people do also a lot of automation based on data. Like a lot of companies do notifications to their users, right? Like you're saying, like push notifications, emails, a lot of this. So a lot of those things require different functioning that just SQL, right? Like you may be preparing some of the data with SQL. So typically you have SQL, it's nice to putting all the data together, and then you need to do some logic, right? Either applying machine learning or training models, or doing some automation, pushing notification that needs to be super reliable, generating dashboards that, you know, data that's going to be pushed to your product. So there's a few things, especially a fintech company, I would assume, has a lot of that going on. Like if you have a lot of, most of the companies, you know, like online gaming do a lot of push notification, and they're really
everybody, yeah. It's like I try to fight that. Once I lived through this one, I was trying to delay orchestration, and I know that's counterintuitive because like I started Airflow, so I could have started with it and just use it as a hammer, and you know, against every single nail. But we delayed. So I can list some of the systems we installed before, but we had, of course, our our CRM, our own kind of logging infrastructure, BigQuery, DBT, Cloud, High Touch, things like Shortcut, Recurly, Pando. So those are all tools we installed and then and started using pretty actively. And we had just like DBT running in CI for a long time, but that became just unruly because then you have like, you got to trigger the reverse ETL and the push and the pull.
I was going to mention
started to have like more things running in Jenkins.
Your ETL to your transformation to your reverse ETL, right? Like so that it's not just happening randomly.
Yeah, otherwise you schedule, you use all these tools have their own scheduler, and they may or may not have webhooks, right? And then you end up like having a lot of trains that miss the cargo, right? The trains are leaving the station on a schedule. They don't wait for each other to leave the station with the right cargo. So I think that became, and then once we added Airflow in place, that just enabled, that became a really clear place for a lot of these like workloads that are kind of unclear where they land, right? Whether it's like push notifications or there's just plenty of these little batch jobs that need to run, and now with AI there's like managing your vector databases and synchronizing them. So there's a lot of heterogeneous workload. You need something to catch all of those.
Guys, I know I would love to continue. We are out of time. Actually realized that it might be a possibility to do a sort of second one with this group. We have a lot of more questions coming in, but we are going to have these available online for anyone to see, share. We're going to try and get Max and Jay back very soon for another episode. And with any feedback suggestions, we are going to be doing a bunch of them. I think our next one is we are going to be going deeper into the modeling layer and going even deeper into AI. We have David, who runs a company called Delphi, which is building something like this, and Ahmed, who's going to be talking about the activity schema and how the activity schema can potentially solve some of the modeling issues. So we're very, very excited about our next episode, which is going to go live very soon. And if there's any feedback, please share with us. You can share directly with me at Tarush at 5x, or ping any of us, and we would love to do better. So
I'm looking forward to the next iteration when I'm called force tier service.
I'd love to get into the semantic layer myself, right? We talked about like how whether we need a semantic, or AI needs a semantic layer, or maybe AI writes the semantic layer or uses it, or maybe we don't need a semantic layer at all. I don't know.
No, Jay, we are excited about using lineage and everything in 5x and doing this out of the box. So semantic layer is, not semantic layer, sort of lineage is number one, and we're very bullish on lineage.
Yeah, because you guys are a platform as a service that bring a collection of tools together, right? So that glue essentially is, lineage and metadata, really. So that's where you can really add value, is really understanding how all these tools work together.
And orchestration.
Orchestration of all this.
Because of how we can do it, we can literally, give this to you for free, right? If you use these 15, 20 tools and preset and, BigQuery and all of the usual, everything we spoke about today are all ecosystem partners, but we can give you lineage for free. And then the cost optimization suite and all of this and observability. So that's really where we're going, is how do we really give you more of the end-to-end platform experience with the flexibility of like sort of moving out parts.
Yeah, just put an AI on top of that, and then you get a whole problem solved, you know.
Why
Yeah.
is the company AI 5x.co and not 5x.ai? Maybe there's
Time to rename.
We are yeah, soon. We are as we said, Jay is going to be at Databricks sort of summit. He's going to be giving a talk. Jay's talks are always the most engaging talks wherever he goes. You can reach out to him if anyone's going to Databricks, and me and Max are going to be at Snowflake Summit. We don't have a booth, but I'll be hanging out at Preset's booth a bunch.
Yeah, and then DM me too. Like if people are going to Snowflake Summit, if there's anyone going, DM me on Twitter, or happy to connect in person.
Likewise, guys. Thank you all for being part of the first one, and looking forward to doing a lot more of this.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, everyone. Just a quick poll on your screens. If you could please rate your experience of this webinar. We'll get in touch with you again for a much detailed webinar feedback. And we'll also be emailing you the recording for this. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thanks, Max.
A big round of applause for Maddie. Maddie's put this together. It's been a bunch of work getting it started, and this is now the beginning of like a lot more of these. So thank you so much, Maddie.
Thanks. Bye. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Max. Thank you, Julien.